Every night, someone sings a lullaby in the forest, and while it's playing, you can't go outside. It ruined my life. I was born in a small town, half forgotten by everyone. He stood at the edge of the forest, which not only rustled, but seemed to be breathing. I didn't even want to go in there during the day, and at night it turned into a living hell. The trees didn't just cast shadows, they made the shadows freeze in place. The house I was born and raised in was right in front of those damn trees. The wooden building with thin walls and wide windows groaned in the wind. That's where my childhood years were spent. It was there that I learned to be afraid of the time between 1 and 3 in the morning. I wasn't just afraid of him, I obeyed. Since I was born, I've been hearing a lullaby at night, not from my mother or father, but from the forest. Every night, something hummed the same tune. MMM, 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 not a word, and the voice, it was inhuman, ragged, strained, hoarse, as if it hurt to sing, as if his lungs were overgrown with moss and earth. But the lullaby started every night, sometimes louder, sometimes quieter, sometimes interrupted by a long, hoarse sigh, like an animal's wet sigh. And then it continued immediately. My parents and everyone at home near the forest heard my singing, but no one talked about it out loud, although everyone knew. My questions made my mother turn pale, and my father frowned, lowered his tools, and whispered one rule. Don't go out between 1 and 3. Never. My parents weren't rich, on the contrary. We were almost penniless. Debts, huge bills for doctors, and my father's job kept us here, so we stayed in that house. I went to school during the day, played with the neighborhood kids, and lived a pretty ordinary childhood, except for one thing. As soon as it got dark, I rushed home with my friends, because it was starting soon. At 1 o'clock in the morning, like a bolt from the blue, a lullaby was heard from the depths of the forest, a song that seemed to want to lull us to sleep, but only filled us with horror. From 1 to 3 o'clock, I listened to her. If I was still awake or if I woke up, I hid under the covers. I tried to cover my ears and pray, but I could hear it clearly. Over time, I got used to it and even learned how to fall asleep to it. It turned out to be a Russian lullaby, one that would make babies fall asleep. I even listened to the original. It sounded creepy, but what was coming from the forest was much darker, scarier. Life went on under one rule: don't go out at night. And when I turned 10, my brother Mark was born. With bright blue eyes, he was very curious from the very beginning. Curious and stubborn. The lullaby made my childhood sleepless and fragile, a fragment that I wanted to forget. But for Mark, it was different. When he turned 6, he started asking the same questions I used to ask. My parents answered him with the same words and constantly reminded me to keep an eye on my brother so that he would not look out of the window at night and under no circumstances go outside. Mark nodded, assuring her that he understood. We thought he really understood. That winter evening, my parents went to a nearby small town to visit a seriously ill aunt. They begged their neighbor to stay with us, but he refused. I don't remember why anymore. They were supposed to return in the morning. Before leaving, my mother kissed Mark on the forehead, reminded him to go to bed before midnight, and looked at me more seriously. Look after him. Mark and I were sitting in my room. The wall clock struck 12, and I said it was time for bed. But he burst into tears, begging for another 10 minutes to play or tell a horror story. I looked at my watch again and, sighing heavily, agreed. We had a great time, and I didn't notice how an hour had passed. It was the lullaby that started in the woods that made me notice. La 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 la. MMM. 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 La 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 la. La 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 la. I looked out the window, and so did Mark. I quickly closed the curtains and told Mark to lie down. After making sure that he was asleep, I lay down on the sofa, deciding to relax for a couple of minutes in front of the TV, but I involuntarily dozed off, succumbing to a strange lullaby. The cold woke me up. The window was open, and I felt such fear, which I had never experienced and probably will not experience again. I screamed involuntarily and rushed forward. Mark stood outside, barefoot, in the cold, and looked at the forest as if hypnotized. The lullaby ended, and only the howl of the cold wind could be heard. I dragged him back in, slammed the window, pulled the curtains, checked the door, and propped it up with a chair. "Why did you come out?" I hissed, barely holding back my tears. Mark was pale and shaking, not from the cold, but from terror. "I saw someone. I thought it was Mom. She was waving at me." My heart was pounding. I couldn't believe this was happening. I prayed it was a dream, but it was real. I took Mark by the hand, retreating, trying not to breathe loudly, slowly looked around the house. For the first time in my life, I didn't hear a lullaby at night. Just a minute. And then, MMM, MMM. La 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 la. MMM, MMM, MMM. La la, la la. MHRMM. The lullaby came straight from behind the wall. I could hear heavy footsteps, someone's labored breathing. The creature was still humming a tune. It circled the house, listening. Mark started crying, and I put my hand over his mouth, even though I couldn't hold back the tears. We crawled under my bed. I still had my hand on his lips. The lullaby continued, as if something was already in the room, when suddenly there was a loud crash, and glass fragments fell on the carpet in front of us. Something broke the window and seemed to look inside, still humming. It went again, heavy, unnatural, straight to the front door. The door groaned, then dull thud, a thud. Something was breaking her. Another blow, and the lullaby was already sounding in the house. The chair I used to prop up the door flew across the hallway and smashed against the wall. We hid under the bed, trembling, not breathing. First, we saw the moose legs. Long, crooked, covered with coarse hair. Splintered hooves clattered on the floor as it passed through the hallway, still humming. In my mind, I prayed, begged him not to find us and leave, but the creature entered the room. He got down on all fours right in front of the bed, and we saw his face. It was worse than death. It had a moose face, but it looked like a werewolf. One horn was broken and sticking out, the other was completely broken off. A rusty hunting knife protruded from the base of the skull. A face like a mixture of an animal and a corpse. Dried blood covered his fur, and his small red eyes stared straight into his soul. Steam was coming out of his nostrils, and from his mouth, long curved fangs. It stopped when Mark screamed. I wanted to scream too, but fear paralyzed me. One of his arms, long and crooked, held an axe. With the other, it reached out to Mark. It grabbed him, and he screamed and struggled, and I held him with all my strength. Moose hugged Mark to his chest and rocked him like a baby, still humming. I didn't understand what I was doing. My body was moving faster than my thoughts. I pounced on the moose, grabbed his leg. He didn't stop. A moment later, the axe handle hit me in the face. I collapsed, unable to get up. Everything was blurry, but I could see my brother struggling in a death grip, screaming, "Don't leave me." The moose turned his head slightly towards me. I was breathing heavily. In red, I made it clear that he remembered me. It took me a while to get up. Leaning against the walls, I crawled to the door with a huge hole from the axe. When I came out, I saw the moose carrying Mark off into the woods, humming and rocking him as if he were his own child, and he kept screaming and crying. At that moment, I lost consciousness. That was the last time I saw Mark. No one else saw him. When the parents returned, they were screaming, not like people, but like dying animals. My mother fainted. My father was crying. This was the first time I had seen him cry. They've aged in one day. My father turned gray after a few days, and my mother stopped talking. They were no longer the same. My father started drinking daily. My mother automatically did housework. Not understanding why, her eyes were empty. I cried every day, blamed myself, cursed, wished that the moose would take me instead of my brother. I lived in that house for a few more years until I went to study in another city. And every night, while I was staying, the lullaby started again at 1 o'clock. But the scariest thing, since then, it has sounded much louder, as if right under the windows. The father boarded them up with boards and chained the door, wondering why he hadn't done it sooner. But it was too late. Late at night, I was crying and couldn't sleep when I heard a light tapping on the boards, barely discernible behind the lullaby outside the window. I got up, looked through the gap between the boards, and saw that red eye. We only looked at each other for a few seconds, and he went off into the woods, still humming. I'm writing this far from home. Communication with my parents has been cut off. We have nothing to discuss. We are the living dead, without the desire and meaning to live. But even in a new city, sometimes when the night is too quiet, I swear I can hear it. La 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 la, la 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 la, mmm, mmm, la 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 la. It's probably just my imagination. Or maybe he really started hunting me. I have never told this story to anyone, but now the pain and fear that have consumed me for so many years have become unbearable. I swallow a bunch of pills to numb my feelings, but nothing helps. Even worse are the nightmares that torment me every time I fall asleep. Moose holds my brother in the darkness of the night and calls me into the forest to join them. The brother doesn't cry. He sits in the moose's arms and says he's happy. He and the other kids,